بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ما بعد. تعريف التوحيد أيها الإخوة, the definition of tawheed. Who can give us the definition of tawheed? Now, to single out Allah alone with worship. Ahsant. Shaykh? Same? Now, so in Arabic, how would we say that in Arabic? Ifradullahi bil ibadah. Ahsant. Ifradullahi bil ibadah. One of the most concise definitions that have been given concerning a tawheed, to single out Allah alone with worship. This is tawheed. We know tawheed is of three categories, and those three categories, if we quickly make mention of them, what are the three categories of a tawheed? Tawheed al-rububiyyah, okay, which translates as, so the oneness of Allah's lordship. طيب. Tawheed al-uluhiyyah, the oneness of Allah's worship. طيب. Tawheed al-asma'i wa sifat, the oneness of Allah's names and attributes. So that early definition that came there, ifradullahi bil ibadah, that is singling out which aspect of tawheed of these three? Tawheed al-uluhiyyah. Yes. Why? That's the problem area, Asant. That's the problem area with many of the many of the nations. That's the problem area. Many had no problem. Many nations had no issue with the oneness of Allah's rububiyyah, the oneness of Allah's lordship, and with his asma' wa sifat. But the problem area was the oneness of Allah's worship, and that all of ibadah should be directed to Him alone. And so, because this kitab is a kitab of a tawheed, a book which has been authored and designed to inform the reader all of that which he needs to know concerning this tawheed, for which the creation has been created for. We made mention of the fact that the Imām, he brought together throughout the various chapters the explanation of tawheed, the virtues of tawheed, its reward, that the reward of the one who perfects it, that which completes it, that which makes it deficient and harms it, that which completely opposes it, or that which even leads to its opposite, as shirk. And so it's important for us to know, if tawheed is ifradullahi bil ibadah, it is also important for us to know what is ibadah. Because if a person wants to fulfill that ibadah, fulfill that tawheed, for which, if he was to do so, at the very minimum, he is guaranteed paradise. Guaranteed paradise as his final abode. But if he completes it, then he is rewarded with entering paradise without punishment and without reckoning. Now, and so for a person to achieve this, it is important for him to know what is worship at the same time, so as to not direct any of that to other than Allah. Naam. The Imam, if we recall, or for those who do recall, he mentioned elsewhere in one of his works the types of worship. In his book Al-Usul al-Thalatha, the three fundamental principles, he mentions within that kitab وَأَنْوَاعُ الْعِبَادَةِ الَّتِي أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهَا, and the types of worship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered with. Mithal. And then he gives examples. What did he say? He says, if we can go in order, al-Islam, al-Iman, wal-Ihsan. So he begins with, Islam, and then Iman, and then Ihsan. And then he says, وَمِنْهُ, and from that is الدعاء. نعم. والخوف والرجاء والتوكل والرغبة والرحبة والخشوع والخشية. أيوة. والإنابة. أيوة. والاستعانة والاستغاثة والاستعاذة. نعم. والذبح والنذر. All of these acts of worship وغير ذلك من أنواع العبادة التي أمر الله بها كلها لله. All of them are for Allah. So all of those just examples that he made mention of, ad-du'a, khawf, that reverential fear, wal-raja, to have hope, wal-raghba, to have a fervent desire, na'am, wal-rahba, na'am, to have awe, and so on, wal-inaba, to turn in repentance, wal-isti'ana, to seek aid, wal-istighatha, to seek rescue, wal-isti'adha, to seek refuge and protection. Naam. We mentioned dua, or the Imam, he mentioned dua as one of the first actions of worship. Wal-dhabh, which we covered. Al-dhabh is what? Sacrificing. طيب. Wal-nadhar, which is? Naam. To make vows. From these actions of worship, my brothers, this might come as a shock to you. From these actions of worship, actually, before I ask this question, we gave the definition of tawheed. Can anyone give the definition of ibadah? There's a definition out there that is well known and that has come as the most concise definition. I'm going to give the mic to Zach this time. Ahsant, I know you know already. There you are. Ahsant, ahsant, ahsant. And the brother here, I believe he had his hand up as well. Did you want to answer that? Yeah? Anyone know that in Arabic? Ahsant. اسم جامع ويرضى كمل والباطن. أحسنت. اسم جامع. It is, ibadah is a comprehensive term for everything that Allah يحب ويرضى, everything that He loves and is pleased with. من الأقوال والأفعال, from the statements and actions of الظاهر والباطنة, inward and outward actions and statements. So this is the definition of worship. Everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and everything that He is pleased with, from the statements and from the actions. But those actions of worship that we mentioned before, from the Imam himself in his other work, Al-Usul al-Thalatha, from those actions of worship, there's an action of worship, my brothers, which is actually disliked. Now that's what I said might come as a shock. From those actions of worship that he mentioned, the Imam, there is an action of worship which is disliked. What is that? Naam? Vowing. Vows and nadhar, which is the chapter we've come to now. Nadhar. To make a vow. Naam. So we're going to see here in this chapter, this is the bab that we've come to, bab min ash-shirk النذر لغير الله. From ash-shirk is to make vows for other than Allah. Vows. Now, what is a vow? Like a promise, ahsant. It's like a promise. In simple terms, it is a promise. Now, so when we say it is disliked, my brothers, then what we need to know is that when it comes to vows, nadhar, it's plural. Anyone know it's plural of a nadhar in Arabic? Nudhur. So vows, initiating the vow is disliked, makruh, disliked. In fact, some of the scholars said haram. Some of the scholars said haram, such as Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah. And there's a strong angle for this. Haram to initiate and make vows. We'll mention the hadith. From them, those who came down a level and said, no, it is makruh, disliked. Disliked. So when it comes to initiating, what do we mean by initiating? To starting it, to enter, to start that action of worship. It becomes an act of worship once it's initiated. To fulfill it is the act of worship. Al-wafa, to fulfill it, to carry out the promise. Because a vow is a promise. To begin the promise is disliked, according to some, haram. But once a person has made the vow, now to fulfill it, that is the action of worship. That is the action of worship. And there's detail with regards to the fulfilling of that vow. Is it obligatory? Is it not obligatory? And so on. The rulings connected to that. We'll go into that, some of that. The reason why it is disliked by many of the scholars, and again, according to some, haram, is because the Rasul ﷺ, in the hadith, in the Sahihain, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, he said, إِنَّهُ لَا يَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ. إِنَّهُ لَا يَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ. Another, vowing, taking a vow, doesn't come with good, doesn't bring about any good. So think about this for a second. Here, the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is saying, إِنَّهُ لَا يَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ. Indeed, it doesn't come with good. إِنَّمَا يُسْتَخْرَجُ بِهِ الْبَخِيلِ. Yani it only brings out something, or it extracts out from the bakhil, the one who is miserly. And it is something which makes the bakhil, the one who is miserly, to give. Meaning of this is as such, if you give a quick example. So if a person makes a vow, he makes a promise to Allah, he says, "Oh Allah, if you cure my son," let's say a brother has a son or a daughter, or even one of his parents, if you cure so and so, if you cure my sick son, daughter, mother, father, whoever, then I will fast for 3 days, or I'll fast the whole month, or fast the whole year. So this is an example of a vow. So if a person says, for example, Inshafa Allah maridi, if Allah cures my sick relative or my sick person, the sick person, Lillah alay sawm 3 ayyam. Then upon Allah, yani meaning the right of Allah upon me, I've made something obligatory upon me. This is the meaning of nazar. In its origin, in the language, it means ijab. It is to make something obligatory. Nazar is to make something obligatory. Can also have the meaning to warn. That's why we say that the Anbiya are mubashirin wa mundhirin, nadhir. And nadhir also from the same letters can mean to warn. But nazar also can mean to make something obligatory. So a nazar, when a person makes a vow, makes a promise, he's making something obligatory upon himself, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make obligatory upon him. So this is the definition. We go to the definition here. You have it there. The definition of nazar is the servant making something binding upon himself or herself, that which is not binding in the legislation. Yani they say, ilzam al-mukallaf nafsahu. The mukallaf, yani the servant who has reached puberty and so on, and the Muslim who makes binding upon himself, ilzam nafsahu. He makes binding upon himself shay'an, something lam yakun wajiban, something which wasn't obligatory upon him fi asli shara, in the origin, in the sharia. So in that example, the one who says, "Oh Allah, if you cure my son, my daughter, I'll fast for 3 days, or I'll give such and such amount, £1,000 in charity, or I'll perform a umrah this year." Any example you want to give. And he makes a promise. So here, the reason why this is disliked is because the servant has made something obligatory upon himself, that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make obligatory upon him. So he has exited out of being in a state of ease, of ease and in freedom, meaning the origin is being freed of obligations. The origin is that you're free. Bara'atu dhimma, to be free from obligation. Until something is legislated upon you from Allah that you must do so and so. That's the origin. And so when the servant, he makes another, he's made something obligatory upon himself, that which was not obligatory upon him in the first place. So he's chosen hardship. He has chosen hardship over the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the mercy of Allah before that was, mother, no obligation upon him. He didn't have to fast 3 days. He didn't have to give this in charity and so on. He's made something obligatory, and this we know is from the Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the servants seek to make something hard upon themselves, and Allah brings them to account for that. So that is why we see examples of this within the Quran and other than the Quran. We see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tas'alu an ashya'in tubda lakum tasu'kum. O you who believe, do not initiate things and do not ask about things for which if you keep asking, then you will not like the answer and the outcome. So Bani Israel, when Musa alayhi salam, he said, Inna Allah ya'murukum an tadhbahu baqara. Allah commands you to slaughter a cow. Had they slaughtered any cow at that point, it would have sufficed. But they began to ask, well, what type of cow? What age, what color, and so on. And so because they made it hard on themselves, تشددوا فشدد الله عليهم. They were hard on themselves, so Allah made it hard on them. Had they initially slaughtered any cow, it would have sufficed. But now because they were being picky and making things hard for themselves, and Allah held them to account there. Likewise, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he legislated the Hajj, and the Hajj became obligatory. And a man, he stood, and what did he say? He said, Akul am ya Rasulullah. He said, is it every year is the Hajj to be carried out? Every year? What did the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? What did he do? He remained quiet. He didn't answer. Then he asked again. And then he remained quiet. Third time again, he asked again. Until the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he said, Lo qult na'am. Had I said yes, la wajabat. Then it would have become obligatory. Imagine if right now Hajj is obligatory upon who? Upon the person who is able. Once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime. However, if it had become once a year, imagine that. How difficult that would be. Here, what we learn is that from the rahmah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that before Allah made it obligatory due to the Sahaba asking to this persistent level, and he feared that it would become obligatory upon them, then he said, and teaching them to accept and not to continue to ask, lest Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it obligatory upon them. Something similar happened with the Taraweeh, as we know. With the Taraweeh, them coming out every night, praying behind the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, until the night that he didn't come out. And then he said to them, again something similar, that if they persist, then it would become, if they themselves don't accept the mercy of Allah and the ease that they are in, then if they seek hardship, then Allah will reward them with that hardship. So this is of similar nature here, the vowing. It is disliked, and according to some scholars, haram. Because a person is making something obligatory upon himself, that which wasn't obligatory in the first place. From another angle, the reason why the hadith mentions that it is only the bakhil, this is something that comes from the bakhil. And vows is something which brings out something It doesn't come with good. And the reason for that is because how often is it the case that the one who makes a vow, he or she, later on they regret it. Because now they can't fulfill that vow. And they find themselves in hardship. Especially when they take vows which are very difficult. So the one who says that I vow to pray every single night prayer. A vow that he's made now. That he's going to have to abide by and fulfill. And so then they regret. Or a person who vows to give such and such in charity. However, now he or she doesn't possess that wealth, and now finds it difficult. And so here, the reason why it is mentioned لا يأتي بخير is because of the hardships that it brings upon people, the regret that it brings about, and likewise, that is the bakhil. It is the bakhil that makes such vows. The bakhil is the one who is miserly. And Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, he explained this affair, and he said that in the action of making vows, for the one who resorts to such actions, the reason why there's a strong case to say that it is haram is because in that action is su' al-dhann ma'Allah. In that action is a person having bad suspicion of Allah. That Allah will not cure my son unless I do such and such. That Allah does not give except bimuqabil, except that He wants something in return. You see this, ikhwan? How you see now why it is something which is disliked, something which, as we said, some say haram, because of what it entails, that a person, he wants something or she wants something really bad. And as is coming one of the word in the hadith likewise, that it doesn't repel the qadr. That nadar la yughni min al-qadr. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure this person whether He likes or not. Whether you vow to do something or not, that will not make a difference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not in need of you vowing to do something, promising to do something. And in that is su' al-dhann ma'Allah. In that is bad thoughts and bad suspicions of Allah, that Allah will only do this if I do such and such. You see? And from another angle, the reason why the person is described as bakhil, miserly and stingy, is because he only does these actions of worship, and he'll only give in charity, he'll only fast, and he'll only do such and such if something is given to him. If he receives something in return. So he's bakhil, he's stingy. He doesn't do these actions unless there's something in it for him or for her. واضح إخوان؟ Now, so this is why this affair, or this particular action of making vows, is something that the scholars, they speak about, and they say that it is an action that to initiate is disliked. According to some, Ibn Taymiyyah, haram. However, the fulfilling of the vow, once the vow has taken place, that's a different matter. That now is an action of worship. To fulfill the vows, that is an action of worship. And so we come to that. And before we actually begin, then we give a brief description of the types of vows. So the first type, or the ruling of the various types of vows, from one perspective we can say the vows are of two types. A vow that is made to other than Allah, a vow to other than Allah, a vow to other than Allah. The second is the vow to Allah. So an example, so as we said, that wording or anything that comes with the same meaning. لله علي أن أفعل كذا وكذا. لله علي أن أفعل كذا وكذا. That upon Allah, meaning the right of Allah upon me is to do such and such. So a person makes something obligatory upon himself. That I will do such and such. That I will fast 3 days, or I'll fast a week, or I'll give in charity. Now, or so on. When a person does this for other than Allah, then he does it. He says, for so and so. For, as an example, for such and such Nabi, للرسول, if the person says, or لصاحب هذا القبر, or للشيخ so and so, so and so. For so and so, يعني, I will do such and such. It's a promise he makes, but he vows to other than Allah. And that can be, again, from the righteous, from the awliya, from the anbiya, the malaika. It can be for the jinn, or the graves, and so on. Vows that are made to other than Allah, or to other than Allah. That is, one type, and the other is the vows that are done for Allah. And so the vows that are made to other than Allah, then they are haram. Haram to make those vows, and they are major shirk. Major shirk. Major shirk which expel a person outside of Islam. Naam. And the vows that are made to Allah, then those vows, as we said, fulfilling those vows are considered as actions of worship, or action of worship, to fulfill the vow. As we said, initiating the vow, what's the ruling there? Disliked. And again, according to some, haram, due to everything that we explained. Now, from another perspective, the nudhur, the vows, of types, 5 types. The first is a vow, nadhru ta'a. Nadhru ta'a, the vow of obedience. The vow of obedience. A person vows to perform an action of worship, an action of obedience. And so he says, for example, lillah alay, لله علي أن أعتمر هذه السنة. So I vow to Allah to make Umrah this year. Or I vow to Allah to fast 3 days of this month. And those there are like general, meaning vows. I mean, you have the outright mutlaq, general vow, where a person says, I make a vow to Allah. But he doesn't make mention of what particular action of worship he will do. He just says, I make a vow. And it doesn't specify. And then you have the vow where a person say he makes a vow, but it's not conditional. So he says, I vow to fast 3 days. I vow to give such and such in charity. So it's not conditional. He just vows. He says, Lillah alayhi an asum 3 ayyam. Right? I vow to fast 3 days. Simple. He just made a promise to Allah. He made a vow. Then you have the vow that is conditional. So the example we gave of the sick son or daughter or mother, father, conditional. Right? So he says that if Allah cures my son or my daughter and so on, then I will fast 3 days, or I will fast a week, fast a month, and so on. Give such and such in charity. So he vowed to do an action of worship, but it's conditional. If his son is cured, now, what's upon him? To fulfill it. Now. And if his son is not cured, then there's nothing upon him because he made his vow was conditional. Conditional on his son being cured. Or for another example, a person, he says, I promise to Allah, I vow to Allah that if I pass my exam, and to any of the brothers here and sisters who are students, again, we don't recommend that you make these vows. Why? Because we said initiating these vows we said, is an affair that is disliked by many of the scholars. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, what did he say in the hadith in the Sahihain? What did we say? He said, "Innahu la yati bi khair." It doesn't come with any good, and it only extracts from the miserly. This is used by many of the scholars to say it's haram, or at the very least disliked. Naam. So don't be tempted to make these kinds of vows, because then you put yourself into hardship. However, once if you did fall into it and you did say these things and you did make these vows, then it becomes obligatory. So in this case, if a person makes that vow, if I pass this exam, then I promise to Allah that I will, or I vow to Allah that I will fast 3 days. If he passes the exam, then he has to fast. And if he doesn't pass the exam, then there's nothing upon him. Now, so that's the vow that is conditional. So this is the first type of vow, which is a vow of obedience. Nadhr al-ta'a. The second type is the vow to do something which is mubah. The vow to do something which is simply mubah. Mubah, what does that mean? Allowed, just allowed. Just from the dunya matters that are allowed. So a person vows to buy a house. He vows to buy a house. He vows to wear a thobe. He vows to ride his car, and so on. These are just matters that are allowed. Anything that is allowed, mubah. But we'll come to the rulings of each one of them. The third type is the vow which is makruh. Makruh, the vow that is disliked. Yani the vow to do something that is disliked, you should say. The vow to do something that is disliked. For example, a person, he says that if so and so takes place, I'm going to divorce my wife. It is disliked. It is disliked. Naam. That's the third. The fourth is the vow that is done in the hal of a person being angry, al-ghadab, or when a person is going through a dispute. So for example, a person says that I vow to beat so-and-so, to beat him up. I vow to beat him. This is something which is a vow connected to a person, or a person, he makes this vow in the state of being angry, and it is possible that that particular vow is a vow that involves something which is haram, something which is disliked, or it can also involve something which it's something which is an action of worship. So, an example, a person, he says, he's angry, he says to his son, or for example, he says that to his wife, that if you do so and so, then I vow to Allah that I will do such and such. But what he's vowing is something which is good. Then I'll give 10,000 in charity. Or even himself, he makes a vow with someone, or in the or during a dispute that he has with someone. And so in order to prove his innocence, for example, he says that if such and such comes about, is revealed, then I vow to fast 10 days. So the vow was initiated during a state of dispute. But that which he has vowed to do is a good action, to fast. So again, this is a different type of vowing. And we'll come to each one, the ruling of each one, the fulfilling of each one. The fifth, the last one, is the vow to perform an action of sin, ma'siyah. Naam. So a person, he says, Lillah alay an aqtul fulan wa fulan. That I vow to Allah to kill so and so. Or an ashrab al-khamr, to drink alcohol. Or an azni. And so on. That a person, he makes these kinds of vows. A vow to carry out a sinful act, an action of disobedience. This is the fifth. As for each one of them, then the first vow of obedience, ayyul ikhwa, is obligatory to fulfill. Is obligatory to fulfill. And as we're going to see in this chapter, the Imam, he brings the hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, wherein she said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Man nadhara an yuti' Allah, na'am, falyuti'hu." Whoever vows to obey Allah, then let him do so. Then let him do so. Let him obey him. If he vows to obey Allah, then let him obey Allah. Na'am. وَمَنْ نَذَرَ أَنْ يَعْصِيَ اللَّهِ. And whoever vows to disobey Allah, then ماذا؟ فَلَا يَعْصِي. نعم. Then let him not disobey him. Now, so example of that, a vow of obedience. Who can give an example of vow of obedience? Now, so he just a general. So that's a general, يعني, without making it conditional. So he vows to fast 3 days. Yes, so that's a vow of obedience. Now, a vow with a condition, a vow of obedience with condition. Other than the examples I gave. Now, there you are. Conditional, now. Ahsant, good. So, a person vows that if he makes a profit in his business, that he will sacrifice an animal. Now, so that's a conditional. It's conditional, and it's an action of worship, because this action of sacrificing is an action of worship. Now, to vow to do something that is allowed, the ruling of this is that a person has a choice. A person has a choice to either fulfill it or to expiate. A person has a choice to either fulfill it, to expiate that which is stronger, if we're going to go for which is better. You know, you always have those who say, but Ustad, which is better? The better one is to fulfill. Even though it is allowed, it's an affair that is allowed. So, example of vowing to do something that is mubah, other than my examples. To drink milk. He vows to drink milk. Something which is just allowed. So here, some of the scholars, they said, he has the choice, mukhayyar. He has the choice. Because we can't say, because if you look at the hadith that we're going to cover in the bab, man nadhara an yuti' Allah. Whoever vows to obey Allah, can we say that drinking milk is from obedience and from the actions of ta'at, the actions of worship, actions of obedience? Well, we say it is from the mubahat. It is from the actions that are allowed. However, many of the scholars, they say that it is better because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised those who yufuna, those who fulfill, make wafa of their nudur, they fulfill their vows. So that would include those matters that are mubah. Now, we'll come to the expiation. What is the expiation? Now, the third, to vow to do something that is disliked, makruh. What's the example that I gave? Yes, Isa. To divorce. A man, he vows to divorce his wife if such and such takes place. So here he has a choice, mukhayyar, but better to expiate the opposite of the one before. He has a choice because he made the vow. However, it is better to expiate, to give the kafara the kafara, the expiation. Now, the fourth, the vow that is done in a state of anger and dispute, then with this one it is befitting not to fulfill it and to expiate it instead. It is befitting that he doesn't fulfill it and he expiates instead of it. And as we said, if you recall, we gave some detail there. It's possible that in that state of anger, in that state of dispute, he makes a vow to do something good. So there's some detail there. If it is something good, then it could be better for him to fulfill it. And the last one, it's kind of like a given. Naam kafara, and it is haram. Haram to fulfill it. It is impermissible to fulfill it. When a person swears and vows to Allah to steal, for example, or to drink khamar, or to kill so and so, then this is impermissible, haram. Another an ya'si Allah. That whoever vows to disobey Allah, فَلَا يَعْسِ, then let him not disobey. And that's a command to not disobey, and so it is impermissible. Or you can say a prohibition. It is impermissible now to fulfill that vow. Expiation. What's the expiation? For whoever falls into any of these categories and wants to give the kafara, what's the expiation? Feeding of a poor person? لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. Allah doesn't bring you to account for those ayman, those times where you swear, on those occasions that you swear, باللغو, meaning and you didn't intend it. And so as the hadith of Aisha has come on other than Aisha, that this verse was revealed concerning the one who says, for example, Wallahi ma adri. He says, by Allah, I don't know. And all he intends really is to just stress a matter. He doesn't intend by him swearing to enter into vows and so on. نعم لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم بما عقدتم أيمانكم. نعم. طيب, and then فكفارته نعم إطعام 10 مساكين, to feed 10 people من أوسط ما نعم تطعمون أهليكم, from the average of what you feed your own people, your own family. أو قسوتهم, or to clothe them, to clothe 10 مساكين. أو before that تحرير رقبة, or to free a slave. فمن لم يجد, then the 3 days. And whoever isn't able to do any of those three, isn't able to, then to fast 3 days. So here the scholars, they say the first 3 you have a choice. The first 3 there's a choice, but there's order and choice. There's order and choice. You don't go to the fasting of the 3 days before the first 3. But those first 3 you have a choice between them. So you can either feed 10 poor individuals, 10 from the poor, or you can clothe them, or you can free a slave. In the absence of these 3, in you not being able to do these 3, then you go to the fasting of the 3 days. And so that's the in Surah Al-Ma'idah, صح? Surah Al-Ma'idah, نعم. لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان. نعم. فكفارة إطعام 10 مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو قسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام ذلك كفارة أيمانكم. نعم. So that's the verse in the typo at the bottom there. That's cut and paste job, Ikhwan. So the verse, the 76th chapter that it says there, that's yani Surah Al-Jinn. But it's taken from cut and paste job here in this PowerPoint. But it's Surah Al-Ma'idah. Surah Al-Ma'idah. Naam. طيب, so we come, أيها الإخوة, to, that's an important introduction. That was just an intro, أيها الإخوة, to the Bab. Due to this affair of another, and because it's important for us to know the rulings connected to this affair. The Imam, he brings, the chapter is short, the Imam, he brings two texts. The first is, or three, I believe, the first is the saying of Allah, the Most High, يُوفُونَ بِالنَّظَرِ وَيَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَطِيرًا. This is due to the saying of Allah, meaning the chapter heading that from a shirk is to make vows to other than Allah. This is due to the saying of Allah. يُوفُونَ بِالنَّظَرِ. They are those who fulfill their vows. يُوفُون, يعني from wafa, to fulfill. They fulfill their vows. وَيَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا, and they fear a day whose evil will be widespread. And so in this, as the scholars they mention, and as Shaykh Aziz ibn Baaz, he mentioned, and other than him, that here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he praised those who fulfill these vows. And whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he praises, then that comes into the category of what we recapped at the beginning of the lesson, which is al-ibadah is ismun jami'. Worship is a comprehensive term, lima yuhibbuhu Allah wa yardah, for everything that Allah loves and is pleased with, min al-aqwal wal-af'al al-zahir wal-batinah, from the outward and inward actions and statements. And so because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised, this is come in the siyaq, the context is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praising the believers, and so from them those who fulfill their vows. So it is an action of worship to fulfill the vows. And so if it is worship, as we know, لا يجوز صرفها لغير الله. It is not permissible to direct worship to other than Allah. That is a shirk. And because the maqam that we're in right now, the time and place, or that which we have before us, is that we are studying tawheed, and that which completes and perfects it, and that which harms it, that which weakens it, or that which can do away with it in totality. So then this is the maqam to make clear that making vows to other than Allah is a shirk. Now, so this is the first point of evidence. Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baaz, he says, ay min ash-shirk al-akbar. It is from the major forms of shirk. وهو الشرك الجاهلية والشرك عبادة القبور عفوا عباد القبور الذين ينظرون لهم ويستغيثون بهم ويطلبون الحوائج منهم. It is major shirk in the shirk of Jahiliyyah, the shirk of those who worship the graves, those who they vow to, and who they seek rescue from and delivery from, and they seek their needs from them. وهو الذي بعث الأنبياء وهو الذي بعث الأنبياء لإنكاره. And it is for that which the prophets were sent to make inkar of, to reject and show their rejection of it. This type of shirk, this type of action. وهذا كان عند الجاهلية. And this was in the pre-Islamic times of Jahiliyyah. As for a shirk al-asghar, the minor shirk, then that is to show off and so on, and to swear bin Nabi, to swear by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وقول ما شاء الله وشئت, and the saying whatever Allah wills and what you will. The likes of these sayings, this is from ash-shirk al-asghar. As for making vows to other than Allah, then that is major shirk. That is the point that's being made here. Now, as for the saying of Allah, يُوفُونَ بِالنَّظَرِ, يُوفُونَ بِالنَّظَرِ, they fulfill their vows, then Shaykh Ibn Baaz, he says, rahimahullah, he says that this is a praise for the believers. Those who fulfill their vows, their wholesome vows, their good vows, which are legislated. وهذا يدل على أن النذر عبادة يجب صرفها لله. This proves to us that vows, that is worship. But we gave some detail there. And we said that those vows, they are from those vows that involve actions of disobedience. And so, depending on the type of vow, yes, fulfilling the vows that vows to perform actions of worship, then that is worship, to fulfill that vow, to carry out that action of worship. Now, as for vowing to perform an action of disobedience, then it is haram to fulfill that vow. It is haram. But we can say that to give the expiation, then that is now an action of worship. Because in that instance, a person, it is impermissible and haram for him to fulfill that vow. But in place of that, he gives the expiation. So that would then become an action of worship, that he carries out the rightful ruling in that instance. Now, and so it is impermissible to direct that worship to other than Allah. Now, the next evidence that the Imam he brings is the saying of Allah, وَمَا أَنفَقَتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ. That is the saying of Allah the Most High, and whatever you spend, whatever you spend in the way of Allah, وَمَا أَنفَقَتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ, whatever you spend in the way of Allah, أَوْ نَذَرْتُم, or whatever you vow, whatever vow you make, then be sure that Allah knows all of that. Now, here the Shaykh, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knows the nafaqat of the ibad. He knows what they spend, and he knows their vows. So he rewards them accordingly. If those actions are done for his pleasure, then he will reward them. So this shows to us that another is an action of worship, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he coupled it along with an-nafaqat. He coupled it along with spending in his way and in his cause. Again, showing to us that it is worship so long as it is done for his sake, such as giving sadaqah to the poor and so on. فإذا نظر وتصدق بشيء للقبر أو لبنائه أو لآلهة معينة صار هذا شركا أكبر بالله. So the Shaykh, he says, so if a person, he makes a vow to give in charity for such and such person in the grave, then, or to a specific deity, then this is major shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وفي الصحيح, the Imam, he continues and he says, وفي الصحيح, and in the Sahih. When the Imam, he says وفي الصحيح, what does he intend? Al-Bukhari? Naam, that goes back to the author, and the scholars, what they do is they look at the author, and the author may, when he says fi sahih, then the scholars, when they look at the whole of the Kitab, and by researching and looking into what he means by just saying as-sahih, because we know there's more than Sahih Bukhari, right? So he could mean Sahih Muslim. But that goes back to looking at what the author intends by looking at everything within the Kitab. Naam, and so from them, those who, if he says well, Sahih, he means Al-Bukhari. From them, those who mean Muslim. The Imam here specifically, he does not intend Bukhari. according to the Imām, fi Sahih, it could be Bukhari, it could be Muslim, but it could also be other than these two. It could, يعني meaning في الحديث الصحيح. في الحديث الصحيح. So it could be a hadith in the Sunnah of Imam al-Tirmidhi, but it's Sahih according to him. So he says, في الحديث الصحيح. In the authentic hadith. That's what he intends. But yes, from the scholars, those who say when they say fi Sahih, and he specifically means the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari. But here, then the Imam, although this particular hadith, yes, is in Bukhari, we're going to see another example, and we've seen other examples where he says fi Sahih, and يعني, the hadith itself is in Muslim. Is in Muslim. This hadith fi Sahih, يعني fi Sahih al-Bukhari. This particular hadith, نعم. From Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, and we already alluded to this hadith, من نذر أن يطيع الله, whoever vows to obey Allah, فليطعه, then let him obey him. ومن نذر أن يعصي Allah, and whoever vows to disobey him, or to disobey Allah, فلا يعصي, then let him not disobey him. This hadith, as we can see, is in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari. Here, Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baaz, he says, وهذا يدل على أن الطاعات يجب الوفاء بنذورها كأن يقول لله علي كذا. So this shows to us that it is obligatory to fulfill the vows, those vows that are made, wherein a person vows to carry out an action of obedience. Such as if he was to say that upon Allah, from me is to do such and such. Amma al-ma'asi, as for the actions of disobedience, fala, then no. Fala yujuz al-wafa' binuduriha, then those vows, it is not permissible to fulfill them. Now, so what we take from this chapter, ayyuhal ikhwa, take from this chapter is the following. First is the obligation of fulfilling the vow. The obligation of fulfilling the vow. But if we was to quickly recap that point there, what can we say about this point? What's the detail we give concerning this? Do we fulfill every vow that we make? Huh? Depends on the type. So, do you want to recap very quickly? Firstly, we said that there are two types. We said from one category, from in general, those vows that are haram, and then those vows that, once they're made, then they are binding. But then there's detail there also in how they are to be fulfilled. What are those two types? Vows that are made to other than Allah, then they are haram. Haram, and they are major shirk. Haram to fulfill. Or haram to even initiate. Haram to initiate. And that is major shirk. And the second is to make vows to Allah. Vows to Allah. We said that it is disliked to initiate. Disliked to initiate. Haram to some. Then we gave detail with regards to those vows that are made to Allah. The first we said is, mother, the vows that are ta'at. The vows that are involve actions of worship. Tayyib. An example of that? To fast. Tayyib. And so, what's the ruling with regards to the fulfilling of that vow? Person has a choice. Either fulfill or give the expiation. Has to. So the vow of obedience, wajib to fulfill it. Wajib to fulfill it. Tayyib. The second, something which is mubah, Hasan Shu'aib. Naam. Tayyib, what's the ruling concerning fulfilling that vow? Optional, but doing it is better, Hasan. Tayyib. The third, thing which is makruh. The vow which is makruh. Tayyib, what's the ruling with that one? Optional again, but better to expiate. Better to expiate. Tayyib. The Fourth, sah? We come to the fourth? Naam, the fourth. The one that is done in anger, in dispute. Yes, so there's detail here with this detail. So if it's a vow to do something which is good, then he fulfills it. If it's a vow to do something which is there's tadakhul here also. If it's a vow to do something which is disliked or something which is haram, then he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it. And he gives the expiation. And the last one, the vow which involves disobedience. Here, what's the ruling? Haram. Is not allowed for him to fulfill that vow, but the ruling is that he gives the kafara, gives the expiation. What's the expiation? Okay, so remember we said there's order and there's a choice. Like what comes first? Okay, so the three come first, which are feeding of 10 poor, or clothing them, or freeing a slave. And between them, is there a particular order he has to go through? Choice. Because we see in between each one of them, qiswatuhum, tahrir raqaba, or. So there's a choice. And then, if he's not able to do any of these three, then to fast. Is it a month? 3 days. To fast 3 days. But as we said, there's choice, but then there's order within that. So the first is to go with the three. And then he can choose from those three. In the instance of not being able to do any of those three, then comes the second in order, which is to fast 3 days. He doesn't go to the fasting of 3 days if he's able to do one of the three. Likewise, if it's established that the vow is worship, then to direct it to other than Allah it is shirk. And we've established that. As Shaykh bin Baaz, rahimahullah, he explained, and other than him, all of them, the mashayikh, when they explain vows, and in particular this kitab here, when they come to this chapter, all of them they say, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised those who yufuna bin nadhr, those who fulfill their vows. And so because it is worship, it is established it is worship, because it is something that Allah is pleased with, and because worship is everything that Allah is pleased with and loves. So then to direct it to other than Allah, then that is a shirk. And the third is that it is not allowed to fulfill a vow of disobedience. It is not allowed to fulfill the vow of disobedience. Naam. So that's the end of that chapter. Naam. And that brings us to the following chapter, which is the Bab. Naam. Min al-shirk al-isti'adha bighayri Allah. Min al-shirk al-isti'adha bighayri Allah. From al-shirk is to seek refuge in other than Allah. Ala kayfikum ikhwan, as you guys desire, we can continue with this chapter, a short chapter, or we can delay it until the following week. If the brothers are going to stay here till Maghrib and the sisters, then we can continue. Naam? Continue? The A's have it. Fine. So, it's a brief chapter here, then we should be able to finish it. So this is the chapter we come to. وقول الله تعالى, and the saying of Allah, the Most High, وأنه كان رجال من الإنس يعوذون برجال من الجن فزادوهم رهقا. وأنه كان رجال من الإنس يعوذون برجال من الجن فزادوهم رهقا. He's saying, the Most High, that verily there were men among mankind who took shelter with the males among the jinn. فَزَادُوهُمْ رَهَقًا. But they, the jinn, they increased them, يعني mankind, men, in sin and transgression. We'll come to the explanation of this word, rahaqa. Now, the jinn, who are the jinn? Who are the jinn? Or what is the jinn? The creation of Allah. And as is common in the hadith, خُلِقَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, the angels were created from nur. خُلِقَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةِ من نور. وخلقت الجان من مارج من نار. And the jinn were created from smokeless fire. وخلق آدم مما وصف لكم. And Adam was created with that which was described to you. He was created from clay. Now, so this is the jinn. And the jinn, as the scholars they mention, the jinn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created the jinn and He made them in their origin to be those who fear men. The jinn in their origin, they fear men. Naam. However, as we learn from Ahlul Ilm, those who make tafsir of the Book of Allah, and those who explain the likes of these verses to us, such as Shaykh Aziz ibn Baaz here, they explain to us concerning this verse in particular, that this verse of Shaykh Aziz ibn Baaz rahimahullah, he says, نزلت هذه في أناس كانوا يعوذون بسادات الجن. This verse was revealed concerning a people, Arabs, before Islam, those who would seek refuge and protection. Al-isti'adha, ayyuhal ikhwa, is to seek refuge and protection. بسادات الجن, with the leaders of the jinn. وكانت العرب في الجاهلية إذا نزلوا منزلا قالوا نعوذ بعزيز هذا الوادي نعوذ بسيد هذا الوادي. They would say that we seek refuge and protection from the master of this valley, يعني from the jinn. From the jinn. من سفهاء قومه, we seek refuge in him, protection with him from the foolish ones from his people. The foolish ones from his people, from the jinn in that valley. So this is something that they would say. نعم. فهو كان من عمل الجاهلية والواجب صرف كل هذا لله. So this was from the actions of pre-Islamic times, and it is obligatory to direct all of that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So al-isti'adha, just like that which we've taken before this chapter and that which will come after this chapter, all of these actions of worship, the Imam now has gone into describing to us these actions of worship, which when directed to Allah is the fulfillment of tawheed. And the opposite is true, or the opposite is to direct these actions of worship to other than Allah, then that is a shirk, the opposite of a tawheed. And so all of this, what is wajib and obligatory, is to direct these actions of worship to Allah alone. So seeking refuge and seeking protection is to be done with Allah alone. However, detail, again, which the Imam Ibn Baaz, rahimahullah, he doesn't bring here. However, many other scholars, they make mention, and they say that there's some detail here, and that is that a person can seek refuge and protection with other than Allah in specific or in a specific instance. What kind of instance would that be? Naam. Ahsant. So if you want to give a general description or explanation of this, what would you say? That it is permissible and allowed for us to seek refuge and protection. Naam, Shoaib? Ahsant, naam. So it is allowed for a person to seek refuge, seek protection, or isti'ana, to seek aid, even istighatha, to seek rescue from other than Allah, in one who is able to help, one who is able, and that ability would be connected to the person being someone who is alive, someone who is present, naam, and able. Naam. And so the Imam actually he does explain it here. And he says that seeking refuge in other than Allah is a shirk al-akbar. Just as directing the rest of the actions of worship to other than Allah is a shirk and major shirk. Naam, isti'adha is no different. He says, however, al-isti'adha bil-makhluq, seeking refuge and protection with the makhluq, those who are created beings. Al-hayy, the one that is alive. Al-hadir, the one who is present, the one who is qadir, the one who is able. فَلَا بَأْسَ بِهَا, and there is no harm in doing that. There's nothing wrong with that. كما تقول للرجل, just as if you were to say to a man, أعوذ بك من غلامك أو ابنك, seek refuge in you, protection in you from your son or from your slave and so on. وقال تعالى فاستغاثه الذي من شيعته. نعم, as has come, فاستغاثه الذي من شيعته على الذي من عدوه. That's concerning who? Musa alayhi salam, when the man from his party sought rescue with him, against his foe, against his enemy. Now, so here we see that it is permissible to seek protection, to seek aid from one who is able, one who is alive, present and able. Now, as for this verse, we see that this verse here was revealed concerning, in its origin, concerning those who would seek refuge and protection with the jinn. Now, concerning zaduhum rahaqa, that which we see in the translation here, but they, the jinn, increased them, meaning mankind, in sin and transgression. The Shaykh, he says, al-waw lil jinn, wal-ha lil ins. So you see, for those who know Arabic, fazaduhum, the waw in that verb, fazadu, the waw is for the jinn, meaning they're the fa'il. The jinn are the ones who increase. Hum in the damir, in the pronoun, the ha, then that goes back to mankind. So al-waw lil jinn wal ha lil ins. Ay zad al jinn al ins, zad al jinnu al insa rahaqa. The jinn increased the men rahaqa. Wa huwa al khawf. It is fear. Khawf. The jinn increased the men in fear, having fear of the jinn. Naam. فلما خاف الإنس من الجن تكبرت الجن. So when the men began to fear the jinn, then the jinn became haughty. They became haughty. Now, but the origin, as the scholars they mention, and we make mention of this, that we as human beings, men, should not fear the jinn. Many of the scholars they mention that the jinn have been created with a natural fear to fear men, because the jinn look at men and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them, beings who look at what they do. on the lands. Look at what they create. They create buildings. Look at what they achieve and what they do. So in the origin, the jinn, they fear men. But when men begin to fear the jinn, that's when the jinn, they utilize that. They utilize that. And so upon us is not to fear the jinn. But here we see that when men began to fear them, then they increase the men in that fear. وقال بعض السلف, some of the Salaf, they said الواو للإنس والها للجن, the other way, that the men increase the jinn. They increase the jinn rahaqa. They increase them in this word here, rahaqa. But here the meaning of rahaqa here would be at-tughyan wal-istikbar. That the men were a cause to increase the jinn in tughyan, yani transgression, and becoming haughty and so on. That the men were the cause of increasing the jinn in their transgression. Now, however, the Shaykh, he says that both meanings are correct. And so if a person إذا تعوذ الإنسان من الجن فهو تعظيم للجن. So if a person seeks refuge, a man, human being, seeks refuge in the jinn, then in that action is a magnification and a glorification of the jinn. ويزاد الجن طغيان وتكبر ويقابله خوف الإنس من الجن. So both matters come about, which is that it increases the jinn in their transgression and in them being haughty and proud and in sin and transgression, but it also at the same time increases the men in fear. Now, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions this here in the context of censure and blame, meaning that it is obligatory for us to abandon this action, not to seek refuge and aid, protection from the jinn. Now, the final evidence that the Imam, he brings, so in this chapter he brings two points of evidence. The first, that the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Jinn, and the second is the hadith from Khawla bint Hakim radiyallahu anha. Again, mind the mistake there. radiyallahu anha قالت سمعت. Who can see the mistake also in Arabic? أيوة. So there should be a sukun above the ayn. سمعت, and also كسرة تحت الميم. سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. She said, Khawla, she said that I heard the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم say, من نزل منزلا فقال أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق لم يضره شيء حتى يرتحل من منزله ذلك. Whosoever dismounts a place and says, I seek refuge in كلمات الله التامات, in the perfect words of Allah, من شر ما خلق, from the evil that He has created, لم يضره شيء, nothing will harm him حتى يرتحل من منزله ذلك, nothing will harm him until he leaves that place of his. Naam. And so that hadith here, this is recorded by Imam Muslim. And concerning this, Shaykh Aziz ibn Baaz, he gives a very brief explanation of this. And he says, well, not so brief, but he says that it is recommended that a person makes this dua whenever he descends or dismounts, descends to a particular place, or he comes to a particular place. No place in particular. As the Shaykh, he says here, if a person, he dismounts his car, a train or a plane or whatever else, comes to any no specific location, that he makes this dua. Naam, because it is from the means of protecting himself from the shar, the evil of the jinn and mankind. Naam. وجاء في حديث إنه يستحب تكرارها ثلاثا. And it's coming in one particular hadith that it is recommended to say it 3 times. 3 times. So in one wording of the hadith that he says it 3 times. وكان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دعا ثلاثا. And as we know, the Messenger of Allah from his habit was to make dua 3 times. So again, to say it 3 times. Now, بكلمات الله. Here the Shaykh, he says, وَفِي تَوَسُّلْ بِصِفَاتِ اللَّهِ. In this is that a person can make tawassul, meaning seek to draw near to Allah through his attributes. Through his attributes. وبهذا استدل السلف على أن كلام الله غير مخلوق. So with this, the Salaf, they use this as evidence to say that the speech of Allah is uncreated. لأنه لا يجوز الاستعاذة بغير الله. Because it is not permissible to make isti'adha and seek refuge and protection with other than Allah. نعم. فدل الحديث على أن الكلام صفة من صفات الله ويجوز التعوذ به وإنه غير مخلوق. So the hadith proves to us that the speech of Allah is an attribute from his attributes, and it is permissible to seek refuge in them, and that they are غير مخلوق, they are uncreated. نعم. لم يضره شيء. The meaning of this, that nothing will harm him up until he leaves that place. فنكرة في سياق النفي فتعم كل شيء. Here there's a grammatical point that's mentioned here, and something that the scholars of fiqh, the fuqaha, they explain. لم يضره شيء, nothing. And it's indefinite here, so one of the principles of fiqh is that it is encompassing of all things, it is general. There is nothing that will harm him. نعم. There is nothing that will harm him. وهذا يدل على أن فضلها نعم. So this shows the virtue of this dua, and that it is befitting to act upon it, befitting to make dua with it. والتعوذ بغير الله وبغير صفاته لا يجوز بالإجماع وإنه شرك. To seek refuge in other than Allah and other than his attributes, then that is not permissible, and by ijma', consensus of the scholars, that is considered as a shirk. Final point here, Imam al-Qurtubi, the Imam al-Qurtubi, he has an explanation of this hadith. This hadith is recorded where? You see it there? Muslim. Imam al-Qurtubi, in his explanation, Mufhim, the Sharh of Sahih Muslim, he gives commentary on this hadith, and he says his personal experience, that he always made dua with this. Every day, and wherever he would go, he would make dua with this. But on an occasion, he was stung by a poisonous scorpion, and that rattled him. It rattled him. And he said that he said, how did I get bit by that scorpion? And he remembered that was the only day he didn't make that dua. He remembered that he forgot to make that dua, because usually he always makes that dua. Imam Qurtubi explains that, or he mentions his own personal experience with that dua in explaining that hadith. وفق الله الجميع لما يحبه ويرضاه وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Now.
Allah is the one that actually gives you the ability to actually even be able to
we explain that. We explain that. Or yeah, a different wording. Reason why it's disliked or haram is because what is involved in that action of a person making the vow. If you look into the mind of the one who makes the vow, he makes a vow and he says, "Oh Allah, that if you cure," the example we gave, you cure my son, you cure my daughter, cure my mother, or if you cause me to pass my exam, and so on, then I vow to give in charity, I vow to fast, I vow to pray, I vow to perform an umrah, and so on. Then in that is a sort of dhan with Allah. In that is bad suspicion with Allah, that a person, he believes and he thinks, he has this mentality that Allah would only do such and such, and he will only give if, or in exchange, he will only give in exchange. And he's almost like saying that Allah is stingy and he will not answer unless there is something in exchange. So that's sort of dhan with Allah. It is sort of dhan. And then from another angle, as is come, إنه لا يأتي بخير وإنما يستخرج به البخيل. A person, it shows that he's stingily and miserly, because it is only in these instances when he says he will do these actions of worship. Not that he voluntarily, without there being any conditions with Allah, that he will give in charity, that he will fast. But only when he needs something, then he vows to perform these actions of worship. But as we said, if you go back to it, and if you look at that which, the mind of the one who makes that vow, then it stems from sort of dhan with Allah. And it doesn't yurud al-qadar. Allah will cure that person whether he likes or not, whether you vow or not. Allah will cure, or Allah will give. So a person vowing, it's almost like he is indirectly saying that if I do such and such, then you have to do such and such. If I do such and such, then you have to do such and such. Or if you do such and such, then I'll do such and such. So other than Allah. Now. Yeah. There you go. Which aspect of the action?
Just any vow you make, as you say, a lot of people regret it because they can't fulfill it.
No.
So by him making that vow, is it almost like he's relying on himself that I can do this thing, but
If you're referring to a person, sometimes a vow can be made. A person makes a vow, and he does so from the angle of applying self-pressure to himself. I'm not sure if this is what you intend, but a person can make a vow. So he vows to do such and such if he does such and such. So he makes a conditional vow upon himself, but it's before Allah. He says that if I fall into that sin again, then I'm going to fast a complete month, or I'm going to give such and such in charity. And he knows that fasting is difficult for him. Fasting that amount of days is difficult for him, or giving that amount in charity is difficult for him. So he does it as a means of prevention. So he doesn't do that action. It's almost like he's placed something there between him and Allah, but to protect himself from doing another action. You see? Basically, he wants to avoid falling into that sin again. So he puts this condition there, and he vows to Allah that if I fall into that again, then I will do this. But he's only done that and placed that there for him to avoid that action in the first place. However, if the mashroot, that condition that he's placed, is fulfilled and he falls into that action, then he has to give the expiation. Or if it's an action of obedience, then he has to fulfill it. Now, does that answer the question? Your questions are deep.
Maybe the question wasn't formed properly. Apologies.
No, maybe that's going to require a few sittings to get into what exactly you're intending. No. There you are. And he can't fast for 3 days. Then in that case he'll drop, but then when the ability comes, then he fulfills it. Because la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. There's no, scholars they explain that and they say that in that instance, then it drops. However, when he's able to fulfill it, so perhaps because there's no one who is poor around. But when it does come about, then he carries out the expiation, or outside of his location, another country. Now. Yes.
The meal here, for example, 5-6 pounds. Okay, you cannot find except the homeless. Yeah, maybe you cannot find the poor. If you feed the poor people in Muslim countries,
Yeah.
60 pounds for 10 people here, you have to pay this 60 pounds from there, or only 10 people from there, maybe 10 pounds.
The origin is the 10, that we stick with the 10. عشرة مساكين has to be 10. من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم. For the average of what you feed your own family. So the person doesn't say, well, because these people are poor, they don't need to have any type of gourmet meal. So, just, a £1 meal will do for them. No, a person has to feed them with what you would feed your own family with. That's the origin. And it's 10. With regards to a person now, if you're saying a person has to pay abroad, then you would extract what you would normally pay for your own family, and that amount, whatever that feeds them over there, then, from your perspective, that is fulfilled. If there's a surplus, and that is for them more than average, then that is not something which concerns you. But the obligation upon you is to fulfill it in the manner that it has been ordered for you to fulfill it. No, it's not cash, it's food. But you can give the cash to someone to then feed on your behalf. Now, we'll stop there. You will for the salah. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد